As reported in The Atlantic, by the mid-2010s, deepening poverty and an explosion of gang and domestic violence in Guatemala, Honduras, and El Salvador were driving children and families to the border in larger numbers. These nations known as the Northern Triangle of Central America, or NTCA, were then and still are facing symptoms of dangerous instability that drives immigration, severe poverty, organized crime, sexual and gender-based violence, and high homicide rates. According to Doctors Without Borders, the countries of the NTCA have long been burdened by deep social inequality, political instability, and conflict, and in some cases have been further destabilized by U.S. interventions in the region over the past 40 years. Now these countries are also contending with the rapid expansion of transnational organized crime which has exploded over the past decade. Across this region, drug and human trafficking by criminal groups known as maras, coupled with widespread corruption and weak law enforcement, have resulted in an environment where civilians face the ever-present threat of violence. Gang-related murders, kidnappings, extortion, and sexual violence are daily facts of life. In my country, killing is ordinary. It is as easy as killing an insect with your shoe, said one man from Honduras who was threatened by gang members for refusing their demand for protection money and later shot 3 times. Launched in 2014, the region's most significant coordinated effort to reduce economic instability was the US-backed Plan of the Alliance for Prosperity known as A4P. Aimed at addressing the drivers of irregular migration, A4P made commitments to increase production, strengthen institutions, expand opportunities, and improve public safety. The Alliance for Prosperity, or A4P, was implemented in 2014 in an attempt to stem the flow of illegal immigrants from Central America. In addition to the A4P program, the administration of President Obama allocated billions under the Central American Regional Security Initiative known as CARSI. The administration partnered with Northern Triangle governments on anti-smuggling operations and information campaigns intended to deter would-be migrants. The Trump administration continued the basic framework of support but generally reduced funding levels. Aid and development-based programs intended to improve the socioeconomic and geopolitical climate in Central America were hampered by the rise of corruption and the consolidation of power under emergent authoritarian populist leaders such as El Salvador's President Nayib Bukele. In March 22, President Bukele declared a state of emergency, still ongoing, that has suspended some constitutional rights including freedom of assembly and the right to legal counsel and weakened oversight of public spending. Though popular, mano dura or iron fist policies in most cases failed to reduce crime and some experts say likely increased gang membership. Mass incarcerations increased the burden on already overcrowded prisons, many of which are effectively run by gangs. These problems were exacerbated by the COVID pandemic. Following some of the longest lockdowns globally, much of Latin America is facing weakened economies, inequity, decreased law enforcement capabilities, an uptick in organized crime, and a group of youth with few legitimate prospects primed for recruitment by non-state armed groups. The socioeconomic impact of the pandemic has caused many displaced and vulnerable people to lose their livelihoods. In El Salvador, for example, poverty levels increased to 41%. Starting in 2014, U.S. administrations have attempted to stem the flow of illegal immigrants from strife-torn countries in Central America by funding social and economic development programs. These efforts were undermined by a shift towards authoritarian national leadership in the region, further complicated by the impact of the COVID pandemic. Successive U.S. administrations have sought to stem the Northern Triangle's exodus by reducing economic insecurity, violence, and irregular migration, but the root causes persist. Decades of civil war and political instability planted the seeds for the complex criminal ecosystem that plagues the region today, which includes transnational crime. In addition, environmental crises, including a destructive coffee rust and devastating back-to-back hurricanes in 2020, have fueled food insecurity and driven migration. U.S. immigration policy has not kept up. In the 1970s, the U.S. processed 1.3 million refugees from U.S.-instigated wars in Southeast Asia. As of 2024, amid the greatest migration of refugees since the end of World War II, Congress has left border agency few tools to efficiently process people. Despite the significant role U.S. policy played in creating the violent conditions that new waves of Central American refugees sought to escape, by the time they began showing up, we no longer had that conscience. In 2014, Jay Johnson, the Secretary of Homeland Security, traveled to Guatemala. He was hoping to better understand why policies of harsh punishment for immigration violators were not working. DHS needed to know why deterrence on our side of the border was not deterring that flow. Jay Johnson, President Barack Obama's Secretary of Homeland Security, called John Kelly, a Marine Corps general who is serving as the highest-ranking U.S. military official in Central and South America, for advice. Kelly's advice? You have to come down here and look north and see what the other side of the problem is all about. In Guatemala City in July 2014, Kelly explained to Johnson no amount of deterrence would outweigh all of the factors driving Central Americans to the United States, and that the mass migration of children and families seeking asylum in the U.S. is not a threat to national security, but said that the crush of the border would continue to build unless jobs became more plentiful and violence less rife across Central America. Following the trip, Johnson held a meeting in D.C. with Kevin McAleenan of Customs and Border Control, Ron Vitiello of Border Patrol, and Tom Homan, future head of ICE. Despite General Kelly's advice, these three would subsequently become integral to implementing a policy of family separation 4 years later. Homan said he wanted to apply the perceived lessons of Operation Streamline to migrant families by prosecuting parents who cross the border illegally with their children. Though many of these families came to the U.S. seeking asylum, under this new model, they would be treated as criminals. Homan explained that the parents would be taken into federal criminal custody just like with Operation Streamline, only this time the process would trigger an automatic family separation. With that, Tom Homan, future acting director of ICE, fathered the idea of zero-tolerance family separation.